Undercover boss orders hot dog at his own joint. Freezes after chef makes shocking confession. This stand is bleeding money, Luke, and I think someone's doing it on purpose, Danny confessed, his voice a low whisper as they closed up the hot dog joint. I found this note. It mentions Brandt and faking deliveries. How did this shocking late-night revelation from a loyal chef send the undercover CEO on a trail of corporate sabotage and a 15-year-old grudge? To hear the full incredible story, subscribe now, give us a like, and make sure you listen to this sizzling investigation. The sizzle of beef franks on the flat-top grill had mostly subsided, replaced by the rhythmic scrape of metal on metal as Danny Nguyen, a man whose movements were usually a blur of efficient energy, meticulously cleaned the cooking surface. It was nearing 10 p.m. at Stand 17, Bun Boss Hot Dogs Prime Pike Place Market location. The usual tourist throngs and late-night snackers had thinned, leaving only the lingering scent of grilled onions, toasted buns, and a faint, metallic tang from the day's relentless business. Luke Barrett, or rather Lucas Brandt, CEO of Bun Boss, leaned against the stainless steel counter, feigning exhaustion after his first full shift as a new hire. He'd spent the evening fumbling with the till, mangling hot dog assembly, and generally playing the part of greenhorn, all while surreptitiously observing the stand's chaotic operations and Danny's increasingly stressed demeanor. Long day, huh? Lucas ventured, trying to sound like a commiserating fellow grunt. Danny paused his scrubbing, his usually bright eyes shadowed with a fatigue that went deeper than just a long shift. He glanced around the small, now empty kiosk, as if checking for eavesdroppers. The colorful, hand-painted menus advertising the Seattle Dog and Truffle Boss seemed to mock the underlying tension Lucas had felt all day. "You have no idea, Luke," Danny said, his voice low, almost a whisper. He dried his hands on his apron, then reached into his back pocket. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, his gaze flicking to Lucas, then to the darkened market stalls outside. Finally, he pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper, smoothing it slightly against the counter. "Found this in the trash behind the register last week," Danny murmured, pushing the note towards Lucas. "Don't let anyone see you with it. Especially not Carl." Carl was the stand manager. Lucas picked up the greasy, creased receipt paper, scrawled on the back and hurried. Blocky letters were the words, Treetop V. Short the order, pad invoice. Carl gets 20%. Don't let Brandt find out. Lucas's blood ran cold. Brandt. That was him. His own name, stark and damning on this illicit little note. He felt a prickle of ice spread through his chest, rooting him to the spot. He struggled to keep his expression neutral, his mind racing. Treetop Ventures? Short orders? Padded invoices? And his manager, Carl, apparently in on it, getting a cut. This wasn't just mismanagement or waste. The reasons he'd suspected for Stan 17th's inexplicable financial losses. This was deliberate, organized theft. Sabotage. And it was happening right under his nose, implicating his own staff, with a clear directive to keep him, the owner, in the dark. He looked up at Danny, whose dark eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and weary resolve. "What is this, Danny?" Lucas managed to ask, his voice barely a croak. Who was trying to defraud him? And how deep did this go? The hot dog stand suddenly felt like a crime scene, and he was the chief victim, unknowingly serving up profits to thieves. Lucas Brandt, at 44, was the quintessential American entrepreneur, a man who had spun a simple idea and a lot of hustle into a thriving business. Bun Boss Hot Dogs wasn't born in a boardroom. It had started 15 years ago as a single, brightly painted food cart on a busy Seattle street corner. Lucas, then a culinary school dropout with more passion than capital, had poured his heart into creating unique, high-quality hot dogs that went beyond the basic ballpark frank. He'd focused on fresh, local ingredients where possible, inventive toppings, and a fast, fun, quality ethos that resonated with customers. The Seattle dog, with its signature cream cheese and grilled onions, became an instant local legend. From that one cart, Bun Boss had grown organically, then rapidly. Now, it was a chain of 25 bustling stands and small storefronts across Washington, Oregon, and Northern California, a familiar and beloved brand in the Pacific Northwest. Lucas, while still the ultimate decision-maker, had necessarily become more removed from the day-to-day sizzle of the grill. His life now revolved around lease negotiations, supply chain management, marketing strategies, and endless meetings in Bun Boss's sleek corporate headquarters in South Lake Union. He missed the simplicity of the early days, the direct connection with customers, the satisfaction of personally handing over a perfectly crafted hot dog. He lived in a restored craftsman house in Queen and with his wife, Sarah, a landscape architect, and their 2 young children. His life was comfortable, busy, and by all accounts successful. He prided himself on fostering a good company culture, believing that happy employees made for happy customers and a healthy bottom line. He still occasionally did mystery shopper visits to his locations, but it had been years since he'd actually worked a shift. The alarm bells for Stand 17, their flagship location in the heart of Pike Place Market, had started ringing about 6 months prior. Despite consistently high sales volume, it was one of their busiest stands. Its profit margins were plummeting. Financial reports showed inexplicably high operating costs, particularly for supplies, and persistent inventory discrepancies. Goods in were disappearing, or perhaps never arriving. Simultaneously, online reviews, once overwhelmingly positive, began to sour. Customers complained of excessively long wait times, frequent unavailability of key ingredients, like the cream cheese for their famous Seattle dog, or specific artisanal sausages, and a general sense of disorganization. Lucas had discussed the issues with his CFO, Maria Rodriguez, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had been with him for a decade. Maria suspected mismanagement at the local level, possibly some pilfering by staff, but the numbers were so skewed it hinted at something more significant. Frustrated by the lack of clear answers from regional management, Lucas decided the only way to truly understand the problem was to see it from the inside. The Luke Barrett persona was born, a recently laid-off tech worker looking for a temporary gig, someone unassuming and easily overlooked. He donned a Seattle Mariners cap, a generic gray hoodie, faded jeans, and a pair of non-prescription glasses to alter his appearance slightly. His plan was twofold. First, to observe as a regular customer, then to get hired and work a few shifts to see the internal mechanics, or lack thereof. He'd only confided in Maria, who would handle any corporate-level queries about Luke Barrett's sudden employment. He certainly hadn't anticipated that his undercover stint would immediately unearth a conspiracy explicitly designed to defraud him. Lucas's undercover operation at Stand 17 began on a Tuesday, a typically busy Pike Place Market day. As Luke Barrett, he first joined the lengthy queue, observing the stand with a customer's critical eye. The energy was frantic. 2 young staffers were juggling orders, working the register, and attempting to assemble hot dogs, their movements uncoordinated. The stand manager, Carl Jenkins, a man in his late 30s with a perpetually harried look and a Bluetooth headset seemingly glued to his ear, barked occasional instructions, but mostly seemed preoccupied with his phone. When Lucas finally reached the counter, he ordered a Seattle dog, specifying extra spicy mustard. The cashier, a flustered young man named Kevin, fumbled with the point-of-sale system, which seemed to freeze every few transactions. "Sorry, man," Kevin mumbled. "This thing's always acting up." After a significant wait, during which he saw several customers ahead of him receive incorrect orders, Lucas got his hot dog. It was good, but the cream cheese was sparingly applied. He overheard another customer complaining that they were out of the jalapenos for this spicy kimchi dog. It was only 12:30 p.m. The next day, Luke Barrett reported for his first shift, having impressed Carl with his eagerness during a brief, perfunctory interview. Carl, barely looking up from a stack of invoices, assigned him to work alongside Danny Nguyen, the veteran chef. "Danny'll show you the ropes," Carl said dismissively. "Try not to burn anything." Danny, despite the controlled chaos of the lunch rush, was a picture of focused competence at the grill. His hands moved with precision, turning dogs, toasting buns, expertly applying toppings. He was friendly to customers, remembering regulars, and seemed to be the only one who truly knew what was going on. But Lucas quickly noticed the underlying stress. Danny frequently double-checked delivery dockets against actual supplies, his brow furrowed. He'd mutter under his breath about short counts again or wrong brand of sausages. Lucas, playing his part as the bumbling new guy, gave himself ample cover to ask questions. "Wow, Danny, you make this look easy," he'd say after dropping a franc on the floor. "Place is so busy. You guys must be rolling in it, huh?" Danny would just shake his head, a wry, tired smile on his face. "Busy, yeah. Rolling in it? Not so much. Things are tight." Lucas observed Carl's interactions, or lack thereof. The manager rarely helped during peak times, spending most of his shift in the tiny back office area or taking hushed calls. When deliveries arrived, Carl would quickly scrawl a signature on the invoice, often without even glancing at the boxes. Lucas saw Danny once try to point out a discrepancy on a delivery of buns from a company Lucas didn't recognize, Treetop Ventures, but Carl had brushed him off. "It's fine, Danny, I handled it. Just grill the dogs." This series of observations, the operational inefficiencies, the ingredient shortages, Danny's stress, and Carl's dismissive attitude toward supply issues culminated in the end-of-shift conversation. As they cleaned, the oppressive heat of the day finally easing, Lucas had casually asked, "You seem pretty stressed for a guy working in a hot dog joint, Danny. Everything okay?" That's when Danny, after that pregnant pause, had revealed the crumpled note. The moment Lucas saw his own name, Brandt, linked to a conspiracy of fake deliveries and kickbacks involving his manager, Carl, and this mysterious Treetop Ventures, everything snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. His initial reaction was a jolt of pure adrenaline, a visceral mix of shock and cold anger. He felt a profound sense of betrayal. He built Bun Boss on trust, on empowering his managers. To think one of them was actively robbing him, colluding with an outside entity, it was a personal blow as much as a business one. The financial losses of Stand 17 suddenly had a clear, malicious source. His mind raced. Who was Treetop Ventures? How long had this been going on? Were other stands affected? His immediate goal became intensely clear. He had to understand the full scope of this scheme, identify everyone involved, and stop them. The note in his hand wasn't just a piece of trash. It was the first thread in a conspiracy he was now determined to unravel. He looked at Danny, who was watching him with anxious eyes. Lucas knew he had found an unwitting, crucial ally. The crumpled note felt like a burning coal in Lucas's pocket. The next morning, before his shift, he found a quiet corner in a nearby coffee shop and meticulously photographed the damning message with his phone. He then called Maria Rodriguez, his CFO, his voice low and urgent. "Maria, I need you to do something for me, top priority, and absolutely off the books for now. There's a supplier, Treetop Ventures. I need to know everything about them, who owns them, how long we've been using them, what their contract terms are specifically for Stand 17, and cross-reference their invoices with our inventory logs. I suspect major fraud. He didn't mention the note or Carl yet, wanting to see what the financials revealed first. Back at Stand 17, Lucas, as Luke, tried to subtly glean more information from Danny. "This treetop place," he asked while prepping onions, "they deliver often?" Danny nodded, keeping his voice down as Carl was in the back office. "Twice a week. Buns, some of the specialty sausages. Started about 2 years ago. That's when our costs went crazy. I told Carl the counts were off, the quality sometimes not our usual standard. He told me to mind my own business. That treetop gives us a special deal." Lucas continued to observe Carl closely. The manager's routine was telling. He'd arrive late, spend hours on personal calls, and his attention to detail regarding stock and cash handling was appallingly lax unless a Treetop Ventures delivery was due. Then, Carl would be strangely attentive, hovering near the delivery entrance, intercepting the driver, and signing off on the manifest with barely a glance at the actual goods being unloaded. A treetop delivery was scheduled for that Thursday. Lucas made sure he was assigned to stock replenishment by Danny. The treetop truck, a plain, unbranded box van, arrived. The driver, a sullen man who avoided eye contact, unloaded fewer boxes of buns and sausages than were listed on the manifest Carl held. Lucas watched as Carl quickly scribbled his signature, exchanged a few quiet words and a too-quick handshake with the driver, then had Lucas and another part-timer hastily move the shorted delivery into the cramped storage area. Later, Lucas managed to discreetly check the invoice Carl had left on his messy desk. It was, as the note had suggested, significantly padded, charging for quantities that clearly hadn't arrived. He snapped a photo of it. The complications were mounting. Carl, perhaps sensing Luke's unusual interest or simply paranoid, started watching him more closely, making it harder for Lucas to gather information without raising suspicion. Other employees were clearly intimidated by Carl. When Lucas tried to casually ask about procedures or inventory, they'd clam up or nervously change the subject. The treetop deliveries themselves were an issue while the fraud was consistent. Proving it for every single delivery without being directly involved in receiving them was difficult. Maria's preliminary report came back within a few days, and it was grim. Treetop Ventures was indeed a relatively new supplier, with contracts that had highly unfavorable terms for bun boss terms Carl had apparently negotiated and signed off on. Their prices were significantly above market rates for comparable goods. Worse, inventory write-offs for spoiled or missing product from Treetop Supplies at Stand 17 were astronomically high. "It screams fraud, Lucas," Maria said, her voice tight with anger. "Either Carl is monumentally incompetent, or he's deeply complicit. Treetop has no real physical address, just a P.O. box, and a registered agent is a generic incorporation service." Lucas now had strong corroboration for the note. The problem was clearly centered around Carl and Treetop Ventures. But who was behind Treetop? Was Carl the mastermind, or just a pawn? The stakes felt higher than ever. This wasn't just about recouping losses at one stand. It was about protecting the integrity of his entire company. He needed to understand the full extent of the rot before he could cut it out. He decided he had to get closer to Carl, a risky proposition, but necessary if he was to uncover the brains behind Treetop. Lucas knew he was walking a tightrope. Getting closer to Carl Jenkins without blowing his cover as Luke Barrett required a delicate balance of feigned naivety and subtle manipulation. He started by making himself indispensable to Carl in small ways, volunteering for less desirable tasks, offering to stay late, and crucially, laughing a little too readily at Carl's infrequent, usually lame, jokes. He also began to drop carefully worded comments hinting at his own, fictional, past experiences with making a little extra on the side in previous jobs, testing Carl's reaction. Carl, initially wary, began to relax around Luke. He saw him as a somewhat dim but hard-working subordinate, perhaps someone malleable. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift where everything seemed to go wrong, the POS system crashed repeatedly. They ran out of signature sauces, and a health inspector paid an unexpected visit, which they barely passed thanks to Danny's quick thinking. Carl was visibly agitated. Lucas found him in the tiny back office, nursing a lukewarm soda and staring at a pile of invoices. "Rough one, huh, boss?" Lucas said, leaning against the doorframe. Carl sighed, running a hand through his already messy hair. "You have no idea, Luke. The pressure from corporate, the constant breakdowns, it's enough to drive a man nuts." He paused, then looked at Lucas with a calculating expression. "You said you worked at that bar down in Fremont before this? They, ever have ways of managing expenses creatively?" This was the opening Lucas had been angling for, albeit a risky one. "Oh, Lucas said with a conspiratorial wink, "there are always ways if you know the right people." Skimming a little off deliveries, over-ordering and returning for cash, a good manager knows how to look out for himself. Carl's eyes lit up with a greedy spark. "Exactly. That's what I'm talking about. This Treetop Ventures, they're good people. They understand how things really work." He chuckled. Old man Brandt wouldn't get it. He's too busy counting his millions. Lucas felt a flash of anger at the old man Brandt comment, but kept his expression neutral. "So, Treetop, they help you out." "Help us both out," Carl corrected, lowering his voice. "They supply us, make sure the paperwork looks good for corporate, and, they appreciate loyalty." He pulled out a Treetop invoice from the pile. "See this? Looks legit, right? But the actual cost is considerably less. The difference? Well, that's for those of us on the ground, making things happen." He tapped his nose. "And the guy who runs Treetop, he's smart. Real smart. Knows how to keep Brandt from ever sniffing around." "Who is this Treetop guy?" Lucas asked, trying to sound impressed and curious. "Must be someone well-connected." Carl leaned back, enjoying his perceived role as a mentor in malfeasance. "Oh, he is. Goes by Mr. Phillips. Used to be in the food biz himself way back. Knows all the angles. He and Brandt, let's just say they have some history. Phillips isn't just in it for the money, He enjoys making Brandt sweat." Phillips. The name hit Lucas like a physical blow. Trevor Phillips. His former business partner, the man he'd started Bun Boss with from that single food cart all those years ago. Their partnership had ended explosively, acrimoniously, after a bitter disagreement over the company's future direction. Lucas had wanted to expand aggressively, reinvesting everything. Trevor had wanted to cash out early, take fewer risks. Lucas, holding a slightly larger share and more ambition, had essentially forced him out, buying his stake for what Trevor had claimed was a pittance compared to its future potential. Trevor had been furious, accusing Lucas of betrayal, vowing he'd regret it. Lucas had dismissed it as sour grapes at the time. He hadn't heard from him. Now, it all made a sickening kind of sense. The targeted nature of the fraud at Stand 17, the flagship. The almost personal delight Carl described Mr. Phillips taking in the scheme. This wasn't just opportunistic theft by a rogue manager. This was a calculated, deeply personal vendetta. Trevor Phillips was trying to destroy him, using his own company as the weapon. The realization was a turning point. The scope of the threat had just magnified tenfold. This wasn't just about Stand 17 anymore. How many other suppliers might Trevor have compromised? How deep did this network of resentment and fraud run? His initial goal of simply fixing a struggling stand transformed into a mission to protect his entire company from an enemy he thought long vanquished, an enemy driven by a decade-old grudge. He had to stop Trevor, not just for the sake DF Bun boss, but to confront a ghost from his own past. The game had changed, and the stakes were now terrifyingly personal. The revelation that Trevor Phillips, his estranged former partner, was likely the puppet master behind Treetop Ventures and the sabotage of Stand 17 left Lucas reeling. He spent a sleepless night in his anonymous hotel room, the name Phillips echoing in his mind. Memories of their bitter breakup, Trevor's parting words filled with venom and threats of making Lucas pay one day, resurfaced with chilling clarity. He dismissed them as empty bluster then, but now it seemed Trevor had spent years nursing that grudge, plotting a slow, insidious revenge. A cold fury settled over Lucas, replacing the initial shock. He felt a pang of old guilt. Perhaps he had been too ruthless in the buyout, too dismissive of Trevor's contributions in the early days. But that flicker of self-reproach was quickly extinguished by the sheer malice of Trevor's current actions, targeting not just Lucas, but the livelihoods of honest employees like Danny. The investigation had a new, urgent focus: Trevor Phillips. The next morning, Lucas convened a covert emergency meeting, not in the Bun Boss headquarters, but in a secure, rented office space. Only Maria Rodriguez, his CFO, and Arthur Bennett, Bun Boss's seasoned head of legal, were present. Lucas laid out everything: Danny's note, Carl's confession, the link to Treetop Ventures, and now his horrifying suspicion about Trevor Phillips. Trevor Phillips? Maria breathed, her eyes wide. I remember him from the early incorporation papers. That split was nasty. Arthur Bennett, a man who rarely showed emotion, frowned deeply. If Phillips is involved, this isn't just about recovering funds from a rogue manager, Lucas. This is potentially corporate espionage, a deliberate attempt to destabilize your company. We need to move carefully but decisively. Their new strategy was threefold. First, Maria's team would conduct an immediate, discreet, and comprehensive audit of all supplier contracts across the entire Bun Boss chain, looking for any other connections to Treetop Ventures or other shell corporations with suspicious billing patterns. Second, Arthur would engage a top-tier private investigation firm to delve into Trevor Phillips' current business dealings, financial status, and any verifiable links to Treetop Ventures and Carl Jenkins. Third, Lucas, against Arthur's initial reservations, decided he needed to continue his undercover role as Luke Barrett for a little longer. Carl is my direct link to Treetop on the ground, Lucas argued. He trusts Luke. He might let slip more details about Phillips, his operations, maybe even evidence that could directly incriminate Trevor. If I pull out now, Carl might get spooked, and Phillips could cover his tracks. Arthur reluctantly agreed, on the condition that Lucas had a discreet security detail nearby and a clear exit strategy if things got dangerous. Back at Stand 17, Lucas walked an even finer line. He had to maintain Carl's trust while subtly fishing for more information. He'd occasionally bring up Mr. Phillips, praising his supposed business acumen. "This Phillips guy sounds like a genius, Carl," Lucas would say, turning the tables on a big shot like Brandt. Must be satisfying for him. Carl, puffed up by Luke's apparent admiration, would sometimes offer more tidbits. "Oh yeah, Phillips has waited a long time for this. He's got other projects to keep Brandt on his toes. Stand 17 is just the beginning." This comment sent a fresh chill down Lucas's spine. Other projects? Danny and Gwen, meanwhile, continued to be Lucas's unwitting eyes and ears. Lucas confided in Danny, still as Luke, that he was starting to see what Danny meant about things being not right, and that he was trying to figure out how to report it without getting them both fired. Danny, relieved to have someone else acknowledge the problems, started pointing out more specific irregularities in Treetop's deliveries and Carl's behavior, which Lucas diligently documented. The private investigators soon hit pay dirt. They found concrete financial ties between Trevor Phillips, through a series of holding companies, and the accounts receiving payment from Treetop Ventures. They also discovered that Phillips had recently been making inquiries about Bun Boss's expansion plans into California, possibly looking for new avenues to inflict damage. The pressure was immense. Lucas was juggling his CEO responsibilities remotely and in secret, managing a high-stakes internal investigation and performing the physically demanding, often demeaning role of a hot dog stand grunt. He was exhausted, stressed, but also driven by a fierce determination. Trevor Phillips had started a war, and Lucas Brandt was now fully engaged, preparing to fight back with everything he had. With the PI report confirming Trevor Phillips's financial links to Treetop Ventures and Carl Jenkins, Lucas knew he had his man. The challenge now was to get irrefutable proof of Trevor's intent, his personal vendetta, in a way that would stand up legally and also serve as a clear, undeniable exposure of his treachery. A financial trail was good, a confession even better. Lucas, along with Maria and Arthur, devised a high-risk plan. He wouldn't confront Trevor as Lucas Brandt, CEO. Instead, he would create a new, temporary persona, Mark Ellison, a supposedly disgruntled former franchisee of a rival fast food chain, now looking for lucrative under-the-radar investment opportunities in the food supply sector. The goal was to approach Trevor Phillips, or rather the shell company Treetop Ventures, as a potential partner, someone who admired their aggressive business tactics and wanted in on the action. Lucas hoped that Trevor, blinded by ego and the prospect of expanding his scheme, might boast about his operations and his motives. It took several weeks for the PIS to subtly engineer an introduction. They identified a mid-level associate of Treetop Ventures who was known to frequent certain industry networking events, which were mostly fronts for less than legitimate dealings. Mark Ellison, armed with a convincing backstory, a burner phone, and a professionally crafted, though entirely fictitious, investment portfolio, made contact. After a few carefully orchestrated preliminary conversations, the associate arranged a meeting for Ellison with a man at the top, Trevor Phillips himself. The meeting was set for a private room at an upscale, discreet restaurant in Bellevue. Lucas spent days preparing. He worked with a dialect coach to slightly alter his speaking patterns, adopted a different style of dress, more flashy, a bit shadier than his usual CEO attire. Arthur Bennett had him wired with a state-of-the-art recording device. The risks were enormous. If Trevor recognized him despite the disguise, or if his suspicions were aroused, the entire operation could be blown, and Lucas could even be in physical danger. The night before the meeting was Lucas's dark night of the soul. He sat in his hotel room, staring out at the Seattle skyline, the city lights reflecting in his tired eyes. Was this insane? Was he putting himself, his company, through too much? The image of Danny Nguyen's honest, worried face flashed in his mind. He thought of the years of hard work, his own and that of his hundreds of employees, all threatened by one man's festering bitterness. His resolve hardened. He had to see this through. The day of the meeting, Lucas, as Mark Ellison, projected an air of confident, slightly sleazy opportunism. Trevor Phillips, when he arrived, was exactly as Lucas remembered him physically, perhaps a bit grayer, a bit heavier, but with the same arrogant glint in his eyes. He clearly didn't recognize Lucas. "Mr. Ellison," Trevor said, extending a hand, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. I hear you're a man who appreciates creative approaches to business. Lucas, his heart pounding but his voice steady, replied, "Let's just say I'm not afraid to color outside the lines to get results, Mr. Phillips. And I've heard Treetop Ventures is a masterpiece of aggressive market penetration, especially with clients like Bun Boss." He watched for Trevor's reaction. Trevor smirked. "Bun Boss. Yes, they've been a particularly rewarding venture." The trap was set. Lucas just needed Trevor to walk into it and reveal not just his methods, but his motive. The recording device was active. The fate of Bun Boss and the culmination of a 15-year grudge hung in the balance. Rewarding how? Lucas, as Mark Ellison, leaned forward, feigning keen interest. "I've heard whispers that your arrangement with Bun Boss is unique, that it's less about profit margins and more about, shall we say, a personal scorecard." Trevor Phillips chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He took a slow sip of his scotch. "You're well informed, Ellison. Most people just see the numbers. They don't understand the art behind it." He leaned back, his arrogance blooming under what he perceived as admiration. "Lucas Brandt, the golden boy of Seattle street food. He thinks he's untouchable in his shiny office, counting the money he basically stole from me when he forced me out of my own company." Trevor's voice dripped with years of bitterness. "Profit from Treetop? That's a pleasant bonus. The real satisfaction is watching Brandt's operation bleed. Stand 17, his precious flagship, is losing money hand over fist thanks to my associate Carl and our optimized supply chain. Every time they report a loss, every time a customer complains about missing ingredients because Carl mismanaged the Treetop order, I'm making Brandt feel a fraction of the helplessness I felt when he kicked me to the curb. He took my future, Ellison. I'm just returning the favor, one rotten hot dog bun at a time." He smirked. "And this is just a taste. I have plans for his other suppliers, other locations. Money isn't the object. I want to see Lucas Brandt watch his Bun Boss empire crumble. He'll never know what hit him." Lucas let the silence hang for a moment, Trevor's venomous confession echoing in the private dining room. Then, he slowly reached up and removed the Mark Ellison glasses, his expression shifting from predatory interest to cold, hard authority. "Actually, Trevor," Lucas said, his voice now devoid of any assumed accent, clear and familiar, "I think he already knows." Trevor Phillips stared, his arrogant smirk freezing, then collapsing into a mask of horrified recognition. "Brandt? What is this?" "This," Lucas said, gesturing to the discreet recording device, "is you confessing to conspiracy, fraud, and a personal vendetta that has victimized my company and my employees. It's over, Trevor." Simultaneously, Lucas had arranged for an all-hands meeting at Stand 17, ostensibly called by regional management for an urgent operational update. As Trevor was sputtering in disbelief in Bellevue, Lucas, having left the restaurant to his prearranged security and legal team, walked into his Pike Place market stand. This time, he wasn't Luke Barrett. He was Lucas Brandt, CEO, dressed in a sharp business suit. The staff, including a bewildered Danny Nguyen and a visibly nervous Carl Jenkins, stared in stunned silence. "Good evening, everyone," Lucas announced. "I'm Lucas Brandt. For the past few weeks, I've been working alongside you as Luke Barrett." He let that sink in, then played a key segment of Carl's earlier confession about Treetop, followed by a damning excerpt from the recording he'd just made of Trevor Phillips detailing the entire revenge plot. Carl's face went ashen. Danny looked from Lucas to the recording device with dawning understanding and relief. "Carl Jenkins," Lucas declared, his voice ringing with authority, "you are fired for fraud and conspiracy, effective immediately. Security will escort you out, and the Seattle Police Department is waiting to discuss your activities with Treetop Ventures." As Carl was led away, protesting his innocence to deaf ears, Lucas turned to his shocked but attentive staff. What happened here was a betrayal, but stops now. Resolution. The fallout was swift and decisive. Armed with Lucas's recordings and the evidence compiled by Maria's audit and the PI, firm Bun Boss's legal team filed comprehensive civil suits against Trevor Phillips and Treetop Ventures. The evidence was also turned over to the FBI, who launched their own investigation into Phillips's network of shell corporations and fraudulent activities, which extended beyond just Bun Boss. Trevor Phillips, his empire of bitterness exposed, found himself entangled in a legal nightmare of his own making. At Stand 17, Lucas met privately with Danny Nguyen. "Danny," he said, shaking his hand warmly, "your courage in showing me that note, despite the risk to yourself, saved this stand and likely helped save this company from much greater harm. You're a man of integrity, and that's what Bun Boss needs." He offered Danny the position of general manager for Stand 17, with a significant raise and full authority to overhaul its operations. Danny, emotional and grateful, accepted immediately. Lucas ensured all employees who had been negatively impacted by Carl's mismanagement, such as having hours cut or being unfairly disciplined, were compensated. He implemented a new, transparent procurement system across the entire chain, with multiple checks and balances for all vendor contracts. He also launched a company-wide initiative called Boss Transparency, an anonymous direct line for employees to report concerns or suspicious activities straight to his office without fear of reprisal. The story of the undercover CEO and the hot dog stand conspiracy, complete with details of corporate espionage and a long-festering revenge plot, was picked up by the Seattle Times, with investigative journalist Isabel Carter. A recurring byline in such tales of corporate justice, it seemed, writing a compelling feature titled, "Franks and Fraud, Bun Boss CEO Uncooks Ex-Partner's Revenge Scheme." Far from damaging the brand, Lucas's decisive action and transparency garnered public support. Customers flocked to Stand 17, eager to support Danny and the newly revitalized crew. Sales, now accurately reported and managed, increased by 30%. Lucas Brandt stood by the counter of Stand 17 a few weeks later, watching Danny expertly manage the lunch rush, a genuine smile on his face. The stand was clean, efficient, and the aroma of perfectly grilled hot dogs filled the air, unmarred by any underlying taint. Bun Boss isn't just about hot dogs, Lucas remarked to a beaming Danny. It's about the people who make it special, people with integrity. From one employee's shocking confession over a dirty grill, Lucas had not only saved his business, but had also exorcised a ghost from his past, reinforcing the truth that loyalty and honesty were, in the end, the most powerful ingredients for success.